America certainly has a wealth of riches when it comes to areas of outstanding natural beauty, like Niagara Falls here. But what is the proper role of government in protecting our places of beauty? What's the fine line between preserving and protecting and still allowing accessibility? These are some of the issues we're going to be talking about on today's episode of Making Waves, the Florida Report.
She heard about a place people were smiling. They spoke about the red man's ways, how they loved the land. And they came from everywhere to the great divide.
So, today on this week's episode of Making Waves, the Florida Report, we're going to be talking about a topic that's near and dear to most Floridians, in fact, to most Americans. As we get ready for the 4th of July, most of us can agree that we live in a very beautiful country, and we are very blessed with the natural resources that we have. So, today's episode is going to be about our Park Service, both the National Park Service and by extension, we're going to be talking about some of our state parks here in the state of Florida. I'd like to welcome to the podcast my guest and good friend, Bob Gambera. Bob, you are a former National Park Service ranger. Thank you for coming on the podcast today.
Thank you very much for having me.
Well, Bob, let's start by telling everybody what I'm sure they already know. I bet it was the dream of a lifetime to get to work for your U.S. government in the National Park Service. Was that as good as we think it is?
It was, I'd say it was the best job I ever had.
Wow.
It was a real blessing. I was, active duty military. I did like almost 28 years in the Air Force, which was a fantastic job. And I didn't think anything could rival that. I retired and I had a good friend of mine who was a biologist working at Gulf Island National Seashore. And he went to our church, and he asked me if I was interested in working for the Park Service after I retired. I said I'd love that, and it was very competitive and hard to get. And he showed me the route to do it, and I actually applied, and went through the interview process and got accepted. And I did it for 6 years for Gulf Island National Seashore.
Wow. And, for those people who are watching who don't live in the Pensacola, Destin area, you worked in an area known as Gulf Islands National Seashore, which is basically some of the most beautiful beaches you'd ever care to see. Tell them, Bob, what it's like out there. If they were to drive out to Gulf Islands National Seashore, explain for them the beauty of the area.
Yeah, it's part of the Panhandle of Florida. It's the Emerald Coast because the water has that green tint to it. And we had to learn all about that, and the sand. The sand is like sugar. I've been to beaches all around the world. I've been to France and Monaco and Hawaii, and I'm telling you, we have the best beaches in the world. And a lot of people know that's kind of a hidden secret. It's getting out there now, but almost the whole Southeast comes here. And, is for vacations, beautiful beaches, the sand dunes and natural resources. And then we have historic, we have the forts. We have 3 forts, at least, that in history, the whole beginning of North America and the Spanish, the French, the British, just tons of history and just a beautiful area. So whether it's natural resources, ecological and cultural, we have it all here in the history too. So it's just
and it sounds like there was some training involved, Bob. Either that or you're quite a historian, because you just rattled off a lot of informative stuff there. Was there like a prep program? Was there like a training program where they told you exactly what transpired on these beaches?
They did. When you first come in, they had some training sessions. A lot of it was you do it on self-paced, do it on your own. They supplied us with a whole bunch of resources, books, pamphlets, all kinds of things specifically about our park. Generally, they had one for the whole National Park Service, Department of Interior, and then we got into the details of our park. And for me, I'm a history major and a lot of political science. So it was the whole history part was right up my alley. I knew most of it. There were a lot of sections, things that I did not know, and I loved it. So I delved into that. Only thing I had to really work on was the natural and the biology, which wasn't my particular uh, expertise. So that I had to study. I had to learn the flowers and the trees and the plants and the animals and the turtles and all that stuff. And because many people would come in the park, and I'd be telling them all about the history and the battles there at the Civil War. And I was somebody asked me, "What's that flower right there?" So I had to learn all that. So it was enjoyable, and I got to do nature walks, nature tours along with the history.
Wow, that is really, it really does sound like a dream job. I tell you what though, since you're kind of my expert witness today, Bob, I'm gonna put you on the stand here for I will see how much of an expert you are. So I've got a trick question for you. Where was the first shot of the Civil War fired? You know, everyone thinks it was Fort Sumter. Don't we kind of dispute that a little bit here in Pensacola?
Yeah, yes, we do. As a matter of fact, you read the history books, it will tell you for something, and that's the official answer, and that would be correct. But we also, when we do tours, when I would do my tours at Fort Brancas, I would take them up to the gangplank, and we'd walk into the fort, and I would tell them at this location, the first shots of the Civil War were actually fired
Wow.
about 6 months before Fort Sumter,
Mm.
and nobody got killed. It didn't start the Civil War, but yet you could say the first shots were fired there right at the gates of Fort Brancas in, I believe it was January, if I remember correctly, of 1860.
Wow. Isn't that something? I mean, Pensacola is just so full of history. I bet we just educated a lot of people right there with that one little brief anecdote. First shots of the Civil War actually fired in Pensacola, Florida. Um, now that brings me to another topic, Bob, because we're going to be talking about a lot of things. You know, sometimes the Park Service is in the news, sometimes for the wrong reasons. You know, people want to adapt the parks or change the parks or figure out how to run the parks better. I think it's probably a good starting point if you wouldn't mind telling us when you took the job, was the mission of the National Park Service ever clearly defined? In other words, when you took the job, did they specify what you were there to do and what you were not there to do?
Yes, we were, and we were given a lot of guidance. We got the mission, and then the experienced rangers would tell us how we fulfilled that in our park. And then, of course, there's the lessons learned, which I was being in the military. I questioned all the experienced rangers about all the different things that have happened, and wherever their perspective was, I would get their perspective on what they things that they had to deal with over the years in the park. So I kind of did that on my own, but they did tell us the main mission was just preserving our ecosystem and the historical heritage and sharing it with the public. So to make those lands accessible for the enjoyment, and accessibility for the general public, for the Americans to come see this park. So we were to protect it, yet we were supposed to showcase it too. So and it was and there was a fine line which we learned later on. We'll probably talk about that later, but where that dividing line is.
Well, and that's what we're going to spend a lot of time about today because, you know, it's a tightrope. It's a tricky area because,
It
like you
is.
say, accessibility, you mentioned, you know, unfortunately, our parks, both at the national and state level, they're more popular than ever. And so our legislators and our departments of the interior, they're having to figure out how best to mitigate that. You know, one topic I want to just bring up to you right now. One thing that really kind of bothered me. Of course, you know me. I'm a doctor, local doctor, who ran for public office because Bob, politics was getting involved in my sphere, right? Politics was getting involved in medicine. And when you go to your doctor, you want to know that you're getting the best opinion possible. You don't want it to be skewed by how somebody votes or, you know, politics really doesn't belong in an examination room in a doctor's office. So, one topic I wanted to bring up while I had you on, I couldn't help but feel like in the last 10 years, Bob, that politics was somehow being drawn into the different branches of government as well. And to me, the National Park Service was no different. I remember, for example, I remember where I was back in the late 2000s when we had President Obama and we had a Republican Congress, and they were fighting over the budget. And Bob, you may need to educate me on this. To my knowledge, Bob, that was the first time in my lifetime that the National Park Service actually got politicized. I believe we were at a Florida Kentucky game um, up in Lexington, Kentucky, when we got the word that President Obama and the Republican Congress, they have not agreed on a budget, and so as a result, we're locking up the Grand Canyon. We're locking up Yosemite. Even here locally, even though we don't have these huge national parks, they were locking up what we call the naval live oaks in Gulf Breeze, and that just really broke my heart. I couldn't remember any prior government shutdowns where they politicized the National Park Service. Were you working during that era? And if so, correct me if I'm wrong. Was that the first time you recall, national politics, budgetary politics affecting your day-to-day activities?
Well, yes, I was at the tail end of that, so I just got hired, and it was under the Obama administration. So I was in the last part of that, and I saw that as I came in, and I began to see the politics in the office, hiring all kinds of different areas, and it was kind of I had a unique perspective as I came in as Park Service, not as I could have applied for much higher level jobs coming from the Air Force, but
Right.
I chose to take the lowest level, just basically park, so I didn't have to be involved in the politics so much. Now it did affect us somewhat, but I did see some of that. I saw it online. We had a Park Service website, and I'm telling you, boy, then I really saw the politics come out. Basically, when Trump was elected, it looked like the whole office at Gulf Island National Seashore went in the morning. It was like
Wow.
you could not there. And well, me and my friend, another retired Air Force officer, we both got hired. I told him about it. He ended up becoming a ranger there too. So we had a different another perspective than most of the employees there. And and then I saw the worst part of it was I saw our the Park Service representative. I can't remember his name now. He was the head of the National Park Service. He's going in closed door meetings with Obama and the administration in the White House. So he's going into these meetings, and he's on the National Park website. He's throwing out things that may change because of the what's going on in the politics and steps that the national park was going to take. And part of that was closing down all the parks during the government shutdown. And they did.
Wow.
And specifically, when I knew that politics was completely involved is when they tried to shut down the World War II Museum, which I just
Mm,
visited just within the last couple of weeks. First time I'd been there to see that. But
wow.
it's a reflecting pond, and it's a structure on the mall in Washington D.C. And they went ahead and there's no fee there. There's nothing really to have. There's no uh, guards or rangers per se doing it. They can, but it's just a monument. It's kind of like the Washington Monument or
Yeah.
something like that. And they put up barricades and blocked access. And I go, that's a political move. That was a political move. And I said, this is crazy. And then, we'll talk about it later, but that's one of the reasons why I ended up, I'm not working at the Park Service anymore, is because of politics. And
Well, and I don't blame you. That's exactly how I felt being a medical doctor when they tried to make, my business political. And it's like you guys don't know what you're talking about. Normal human beings, we don't interact this way. We don't base our decisions based on politics. But no, I remember those years very well. One of those Obama shutdowns, I went out to this area that I referenced earlier. It's called the Naval Live Oaks. For those of you that don't live here, it's a stretch of of sand. Basically, I think it dates back to the Andrew Jackson era, if I'm not mistaken, Bob. But basically, it's an area where they have a lot of live oak trees. There's access to the beaches both on the bay side and on the sound side. And Bob, in previous years, I'd go out there with my dog. Again, it's just kind of left to nature. There's not a whole lot there to see. There is a visitor center if you're interested in that kind of thing. To be honest, I would go there,
No
Bob.
longer.
I'd pull the car off the road. I'd just go walking. I mean, you could walk for miles on sandy trails in the naval live oaks. And like Bob was saying, you don't really need supervision. I mean, there's people that go out there on their own. When I was there, Bob, some people I guess who live in the area have set up rope swings out over the bay water, and so they're like local hangouts. And under the Obama administration, all that was walled off. I mean, the road into the live oaks was barricaded. And I'm like, I don't need the government's permission to walk my dog. Like no park ranger ever escorted me through the nature trails. Why can't I do this during a government shutdown? Again, to me, it just reeked of politics. And I didn't know if you guys felt it on your level or not.
We did, and how politics, comes kind of dovetails into what you're talking about for the medical thing, and where it finally during COVID, when that hit, they shut. They didn't even rehire us as seasonal rangers. We didn't. They said they got rid of all our programs. We couldn't have contact with the public, so it was basically all shut down. And I had the opportunity, me and my other friend who was another ranger, we had the opportunity to do a temporary term assignment. They hired us for 2 consecutive years full time, and we had just started working. And we came back under the my supervisors that were hiring us back. I said, "Are we all done with this masking stuff and all the crazy stuff?" Oh, yep, that's all history. So we show up to work, and we're working there for about a month. Things are going great, and within I think it was April we started working, and in May we got an alert on our phones. I knew something was up. Um, we were in the museum. And some of the other rangers came in, and they had masks on
Mm,
while they were inside the museum. I'm going, okay, we got rid of that a year ago. What's
right.
going on here? And they didn't say anything, and they're wearing masks. And I didn't ask because there was tourists in there too walking around. And I said, okay, and all of a sudden I saw signs up against the wall saying you have to wear your mask and this and that. And I go, okay, something's going on. And my friend, we started discussing it. And he goes, yeah, I think they're about ready to reinstate all the draconian restrictions. And
Mm,
I said, nah. I said, I don't think that's going to happen. Well, it was weird. We showed up to work on Monday the next week. It was none of the other rangers were there. They were all gone. It was me and my friend only. We opened up the fort, which was kind of strange. There was nobody else in the ranger's office. And so we open up the fort, and my friend pulls up the computer, and he sees the National Park Service says, safety implementations are back in, COVID, masks are be required, blah, 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 all these restrictions that they had a year before. And remember, this is just after Biden came in office. He came in January.
right.
So he's reinstating everything. And I remember thinking, I go, well, that's not going to affect us any, especially here in Florida, forgetting that we're federal. And my friend said, I don't know if this is, all of a sudden our beepers went off, and it was just same kind of beeping warnings we used to get for things in the military. And I pull it up, and we look, and it says mask implementation is back in, stay, 8 feet away from all visitors, have no more groups than 3, all these restrictions. It makes our job impossible. We can't even do a tour. Everything was canceled for the day. We're getting all these announcements. So my friend looks at me and he says, I think this is my last day at the park.
Wow.
And and it hit me. I go, you know what? I think this is my last day too. So
Mm,
we called up our boss, and they were all in Mississippi at the time, another part of our
right.
park. And and he didn't answer. And I left a message. I said, hey, me and my friend here, we opened up the park. There's nobody here. We just, and being somewhat facetious and joking around. I said, I think our system got hacked by the Chinese because I said they're saying that we're all back on masks and everything. And I'm assuming this is a joke.
Right.
So, but I said, here, we're not playing by those rules. So, um, if you want us to close up the park and go home, you need to let us know. That's
Right.
He calls us back 5 minutes later. He goes, now we're having big meetings and we're talking with the park director. And he goes, stay on. He goes, thanks for letting us know. Just keep going. You don't have to wear a mask or nothing. Just
Okay.
we're figuring this all out.
Sure.
And he goes, stay there to the end of the day. You know,
Okay.
but goes, so we did, and it's one of my best days in the park. Because we knew what was coming, and we knew this would probably be our last day.
Mm.
So we're just talking to visitors and everything else, and they had put up the signs to say masks are required again. And we're standing there, and people are walking in. Go ahead, you guys got masks? I thought you guys didn't do that in Florida. I said, we go, look at me. I said, do you see a mask on my face? I said, see that other ranger over there?
Mm.
And they go, oh yeah, okay, great. And they all came in.
Wow.
Another couple near the end of the day, I was telling them about our great museum we had there, which is closed by the way now. But I said, go over there. It's great. The kids will love it. They have a bunch of stuff about turtles and birds. And they said, this is great. It's a great museum. And they said, oh, great. And they all started going. And all of a sudden the father stops. He goes, oh, we're not going. And I said, why not? He goes, well, I saw the sign said masks are required. I said, no, they're not. Not today. You guys go
Wow.
ahead. So
Good for
that
you.
we kind of we put our foot down. We were not going to play those games. And finally, our boss called us at the end of the day. He goes, okay, you guys got leave. I'm going to give you guys paid leave to the end of the week, and then we can talk about we'll make a decision about what's going on, which means that was the end of the pay period, and they were
Right.
going to let us go at Friday,
Right.
which we kind of knew. So that's what
Right.
happened. And then we came in and we turned in our stuff the next week, and we parted
Mm.
on good terms. But it was that was that was the end of my park service career because of all that. And they wanted to keep us on. Said, you don't have to retire. You guys can stay on, and we'd have no tours, nothing to do, and they'd pay us. And
Wow.
I said, we're not going to do that. So.
Yeah. But again, Bob, I mean, I'm proud of you for that because it goes back to what we laid out in the first couple minutes when I was asking you, what were you supposed to be doing there? I mean, the mission is to have this available and accessible to your fellow Americans and to preserve it for future generations. Well, if we're not allowed to enter, I mean, like you say, if they're squabbling over the budget and they put iron gates down,
Mhm.
that's in defiance of the mission. When they tell you, hey, there's a viral outbreak that you may or may not be having in Florida, but we're going to force you to do this or you can't enter, that's not making it accessible. That's putting up barriers to accessibility. So, I'm really proud of you for taking that stance.
Well, I was in a position where I was retired and I already had an income. So, I mean,
Yeah.
it for me, it was easy for me to stand on my on my principles. Whereas I felt sorry for some. I know there were some fee collectors who who'd take money at the front gate or work in the campgrounds. And there was one woman that had been working for the Park Service for, I think 25 years. And she was lamenting. I remember her on Facebook just going, I don't know
Mm,
what I'm going to do because
wow.
I need this job. And she goes, if they make us they were trying to force them to get the shots in the government. So
Wow.
this was after we had already quit. Now, then they started pushing them to get the shots.
Wow.
So I don't know ever what happened, whether they forced the Rangers to do it. I know they were doing it in the military, and a lot of guys got kicked out for that. And I don't know if the Park Service went that far, but I knew they were talking about it. So, um, their whole livelihoods were at stake, and some people stood up and said, "No, we're not going to do it."
Well, I commend you. I mean, like I said, I know you were in a position to make that decision, but I still commend you. But that brings up a very important thing that I wanted to discuss with you. You mentioned how COVID kind of served to keep people away. I mentioned my experience with the government shutdowns, and you were at the tail end of that. How when there was a shutdown, they forcibly kept people away. It's like they were holding our parks hostage. And we should never allow politics to hold our national treasures hostage. Uh, One other example I just wanted to run by you, you know, at the federal level, not so much, but at the state level, there's state parks as well that, you weren't a part of. That would be a different department. That'd be the Department of Parks and Recreation here in the state of Florida. Um, there are state parks that I've been to, Bob, where I get the feeling that the conservation aspect may outweigh the accessibility aspect, or it may even sometimes even outweigh the historical aspect. I mean, if you want me to be blunt about it, I believe there are state parks in Florida, maybe you've experienced national parks, where it's almost like the rangers. Again, I don't know if it's a political bias. Maybe they're getting some of their politics mixed into their job. I get the feeling there's certain parks where they feel like their mission is to keep you out of the park. Like, in other words, Gulf Islands National Seashore, maybe we don't want people visiting these parks. Maybe we don't want them here. Did you ever get that impression at your job? Were there workers like that where they felt like their job was to keep humankind, the human race, out of this environment?
Yes, and that is the big tension, and that's also in the federal parks. So
Mm,
you have depending on type of parks that you're in, especially the natural ecosystem parks. You're talking Yosemite, Gulf Island National Seashore, real historical places. You have a tension. You've always had this tension in the park. I saw it. It was to make it to protect it, and then to make it accessible for the enjoyment and education of the public. So those are the two missions, and there's you're supposed to mix those two and use
yeah.
common sense. And you need to protect your park, but you also need to make it accessible. So that was the tension, and some, and I think the park directors had a lot of power. Each national park has a director who he pretty much sets the tone of where their park's going to be going with that direction. Um, the you would have people in charge and rangers who their whole purpose is to keep out people because
Yeah.
people are evil. The environment is good. I mean, that's where you get a lot of young people coming out of college. They have that idea. We had a lot of young interns who I had some really interesting discussions with just what they were learning in school at the time and coming out. Environmental science engineers are a lot of the people who work for the National Park Service, and they would come and they really had this bias of protecting the parks where making accessible was not in their wheelhouse. And
Well, and I'm
if they
glad.
always had to go from one to the other, they're always going to go to the cut it off and restrict it. Now you have enough, and then you have the other side who just wants to open up everything and make it like like a boardwalk carnival.
Yeah,
They
like a
want to,
Disneyland.
yeah. So you have those two say we can make more money and we don't have to uh, have visitor fees if we open up and have bring something else in here. So you had those two sides were constantly trying to decide where the middle ground was.
Well, I'm so glad that you acknowledge that, because that is the palpable feeling I get. So probably, again, I probably deal more with state parks. Living local and having been a former state representative, my experience is probably more with the state parks. But I can tell you, it's more of the same at the state parks. I've posted on social media about my experiences there. Here, most of our state parks are on those beautiful beaches, especially down in Walton County. For those people that may not be aware, they're currently fighting in Walton County over who owns the sand. People with beachfront homes, they are hiring bodyguards and security people to keep people off the beach. So what's happening, Bob, is more and more people are looking to the state parks for beach access. So my most recent experience, at probably the most popular state park in the area, Grayton Beach State Park, they open, I think, at 9 a.m. I sometimes go there to drop off a kayak and just paddle around those dune lakes, which are unique as far as the world is concerned. You don't see those anywhere else in the world. Um, but the other afternoon, I go to Grayton Beach State Park, Bob, and there's a gate there. There's a gate to leave. There's a gate to enter, and the gate leads to a beach parking lot. The gate also leads to a kayak drop off. It's a boat drop off where you can drop off your kayak, your canoe, what have you. Um, at the main gate, okay, there wasn't even a man there. There was a sign. A guy did come out. We are not accepting people in at this time. The park is full. And Bob, if you've ever been to Great Beach State Park, it's hundreds, if not thousands of acres. Like it's a huge place. Now, I don't know if they meant all the parking lot is full. I don't know if they meant you don't want to go to the beach right now because the beach is just full of visitors. I don't really know what full meant. And so I sat there, right? I sat there. I didn't go anywhere in my car. So finally, an individual did come out of the booth, but they weren't professionally dressed. They looked like maybe a volunteer or something. It was a guy, and he walks up to the window of my car and said, "Hey, turn around." I'm like, "Well, no, I just want to drop off my kayak. I live, not far from here. I'm just here to drop off my kayak. I'm not going to the beach. I'm not going to the beach parking lot. I'm going to the kayak parking lot, which is always empty." And that didn't factor into the equation. I was told, "Nah, turn around. We're full." And they were like, "Come back in an hour." So, Bob, as I'm sitting there, the exit gate is going up every 5 seconds because, it's 2 o'clock in the afternoon. If you arrived at 9 a.m., you're sunburned, you're leaving the beach, you're done with Great Beach State Park. So, car after car after car was leaving. These aren't people that were turned away these are people that were on the beach that were leaving. And so I point to all those cars and I say, well, six people just left. I'll, now, let me in and you'll be -5. I mean, I'll take one of their spots. And again, there was no logic, there was no deduction. It was come back in an hour. Now, in your experience, did you ever have to deal with capacity limits? And if so, what does that capacity mean? Are they counting parking lots? Are they taking into account which part of the park I'm using? Or do you think that was just a volunteer who wanted an hour break?
Yeah, well, I don't know about the state park, but to me, I mean, just the evidence you gave, I would assume that he just didn't want to deal with it. But
Yeah.
for the national park, for us, our park, I'll tell you, when we would come, we had a separate campground, so that would get full. So
Yeah.
that was
Yeah.
that was online, and you had to get in there and reserve months at a time, especially in the high seasons.
Same thing
So
at the state level. The state does the same thing. And at the state level at Great Beach, the cabins, the campgrounds are separate from where I was going.
yeah, so and if you were uh, 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 there was hunters, fishermen, because the fishermen want to come in and fish the piers at at 4 in the morning, 5 in the morning. So they actually supplied a code for the gate. So fishermen, hunters, and people in the campgrounds could punch in a key, and the arm would come up, and they could go into the park at all hours if there was no ranger at the station, which a lot of times there was no ranger. So those people had access. And at the
Wow.
opening time of the park, if there was no ranger, they would put the arm up and people could just drive in, and they would have an honor
Wow.
system if, to come in to pay. There was
Sure.
a box. Some people would, some people wouldn't. And the most crowded we would get would be during the Blue Angel practices and the Blue Angel shows.
100%.
And we would open up, people would park on if you've been down to the end of the island
Hmm.
it, it at Fort Pickens, we have
Right.
roads around all the forts and the old historic military base, and people would come in there, and we actually rangers we would do traffic control. The law enforcement rangers would do traffic control. Everybody could park all along the roads and the sides, and people, it would just be packed, and people would watch the show, and then they would go home after that. So, um, I don't think we ever closed the park down for capacity. Now we would shut it down for like storms coming. We would do that,
Right. Right.
and or in the beginning of all the COVID stuff, occasionally, but not. We did never shut the park down for capacity. And I don't know if you notice, if you ever go down there too. A lot of people would, during Memorial Day, when it's just Pensacola Beach is a madhouse. It gets crowded at our park too, but we have turnouts for different parts of the beaches. People can go park. And it's full. It's full. You drive through it. You can't find a place to park. You go somewhere else, maybe down to the Fort Park where there's places to park, and then come back later and see if there's an opening, and then you can pull in. So We didn't have
Well,
that so much at Fort Pickens.
and another thing I wanted to mention while we're talking about the mission, to me, you mentioned how some of the younger generation, they come with their environmental science degree and they want to work for the Park Service and they see humans as the enemy. To me, the main enemy, right? Well, the reason we have a Park Service is to prevent development. Right? I
Hmm.
mean, to me, that's
Yes.
the enemy. So
Yes.
we don't have wall-to-wall condos all the way from Pensacola to Destin. So as part of that mission, as part of keeping development at bay, to me, a key part of the mission would be to also have upkeep of the beaches that you're visiting, right? Because as you say, all of these places, the state parks, the Gulf Islands National Seashore, the federal, all these places charge admission fees. Um, I don't know if people realize that in the Navarre area, the land that is federally protected, the land that the feds are responsible for, do you know, after our last big hurricane, Hurricane Dennis in 2005, Bob, it tore up the beach road there between Navarre and Pensacola Beach. Do you know, Bob, and I brought an example today, you can still pick asphalt out of the sand for, I don't know, Bob, how far is that beach? 20 miles? I mean, so the sand was never purified. It was never filtered or they never got. And to be honest, Bob, this is a small chunk. There were larger chunks that I used to collect right after the hurricane, but I just wanted to give a representative piece of what you can find on any beach between Pensacola Beach and Navarre. Shouldn't upkeep be a part of the mission as well? Shouldn't if the feds are going to be all in, if the feds are going to say this is our land, don't you think the feds should also budget for sifting the sand and getting impediments like this out of our sand?
Absolutely. And you brought up an interesting point. There was a huge fight. Now, I wasn't involved in it, but I heard about it. And my friend who got me the job, into, he was, he was part of this whole discussion. And there was a huge fight at Gulf Island National Seashore about getting, repairing those roads, getting all that asphalt out and the damage it was doing to the park. And this was a decision made by the park after some of the hurricanes. The was They got money to rebuild these roads after Aaron and Ivan and all those early hurricanes. They raised the road, made the road straight from Pensacola Park West, the state park, all the way to Fort Pickens. They made a straight road all the way through, and they raised it high so it wouldn't flood over. And what happens is when the hurricanes would come, they would undercut underneath the road, come underneath, and all the asphalt would collapse, breaking it tons of chunks. And the repair, it was years before they could get those roads repaired. Then they
Right.
built it. Then they fought again. They said, don't do that because we got all this concrete we got to get, asphalt we got to get rid of. They built the same road again, a raised road, to
Yeah.
try to protect it from heavy rains and high surf, but not hurricanes. Another hurricane comes through, washes under. Now you have even more asphalt. They
Right.
finally hired a contractor to come clear out all that asphalt. But the contract to save money, they're not taking out every piece as you showed there. They'd
Right.
only do certain sections and certain sizes. And they did when they rebuilt the road. Finally, they rebuilt the road curvy to follow the lanes to keep,
Mhm.
and they made it flat. So you just have a high tide sometimes. That road's gonna get flooded and sand over it, but it doesn't break up the road. You just get
There
the
you go.
sand off of it, and the road's still good. So
So
that's
they actually learned something from Hurricane Dennis. They actually learned, hopefully we don't get more of these. But I always couldn't help but feel, because again, that was 2005. When you talk about hurricane cleanup, 2008 came along shortly thereafter. I couldn't help but feel maybe this was a political decision as well. Maybe they knew how we vote up here in Northwest Florida, and they say, we're not rebuilding their road. We're not sifting their sand. All I know is that if you had a private beach where you had condominiums and beachfront, if you had places like Destin or something,
right.
don't you know they'd be out there the next day sifting this stuff out. Uh, but yeah,
Yeah,
upkeep to me is important.
Yeah, I don't remember all the politics involved with that. There was a big fight for funding to get all that asphalt out. And apparently the contract that they got was pretty weak. And they didn't do the job that that everybody wanted to do. Nobody wanted to pay for it. And there was a big fight. I don't remember all the details of that,
Right.
but I can find
Well,
out, but I don't know
and
myself.
I don't really want to make this political, but just so the viewers know, I remember the arguments about these chunks of asphalt, and it actually became uh, Department of Interior policy. They said, no, our job is to preserve this land and tell the story as history changed. We go from the Spanish conquistadors to the Native Americans to the Confederate forces to the people nowadays. So they actually incorporated this into their plan. They said, no, nature gave us these islands. Nature broke up the road. So they actually tried to rationalize why they were leaving chunks of asphalt in the sand. They said, no, this is how nature intended. And it's like, oh my God, that's quite a stretch for me. But
Yeah,
that that
that is
that's how they
that all
justified it.
that is an excuse. We saw it in military all the time. That's just money.
There you go.
That's
There you go.
money is the driving that, and either they didn't want to pay for it or somebody else didn't want to pay for it, but it's all money. That's
And speaking of money, that brings us to our next point. I want to talk to you about accessibility because in addition to letting us in and lightening up on some of these capacity limits and not bringing masks into the play and not letting political shutdowns keep us out, sometimes money keeps us out, Bob. I mean, some of these parks can be kind of pricey. I mean, at the state level, I wouldn't say they're cost prohibitive, but if you're that kid in inner city Pensacola and you're doing a school trip, or let's say your mom just wants to take you down to Great Beach State Park for the weekend, $5 is $5 for some things. They're like, why would we go there when we could just go to our local beach in Pensacola and not pay anything? So I wanted to talk to you about fees because the National Park Service, some of those fees can get steep. I just found out today, I knew when President Trump got reelected, I knew there was talk of raising fees for foreigners. In other words, if you're here as a foreign tourist and you want to see the Grand Canyon, well, we want Americans to see the Grand Canyon first, right? They have first dibs. So I think the National Service has done the best they can to keep admission fees very low while charging higher fees to foreign visitors and foreign tourists. Uh, Again, sometimes to the tune of hundreds of dollars, if you can believe that. Um, Give me your vantage point on that. I mean, again, I'm a Republican, but I think our taxes should pay for those parks. And because we're taxpayers, I would love for people to visit Fort Pickens and not have a financial disincentive. I'd like for it to be free for our teens or free for really free for anybody. But let me know the feasibility of that. What are your thoughts on that?
well again that was the whole uh, national park system was designed on that to be uh, to have no fees to make it accessible, and of course over time that's changed. Now we have some of the highest national park fees of all the national parks. Um, our upkeep is pretty steep, and the thing is, I think the parks get to keep all the money that they for their specific parks. So nobody ever has enough money from the budget from the federal government for to run their parks. So all the park directors have to deal with that to get money for their parks, for their budget. They've got to figure out how many people they can hire, what kind of work they could do to keep. So that's a big that's for the director and the administration. And the way Gulf Island National Seashores has tackled that problem is entrance fees. So we have pretty high entrance fees for national parks. And I just, like I said, just went to DC and they were all free. All the
Right,
museums,
right,
everything.
right.
But here we charge, and the and then they'll tailor. You can't get government key. They have for senior citizens, for military, all that different discounts and such. But it's a lot of money. But all that money goes back into our parks, so that money becomes kind of the park director counts on that money, and that's how we hire a lot of our interns, extra seasonal ranger positions, certain cleanup or maintenance things. So it's almost become critical. It's part of the budget now. So you
Mm.
got those fees coming in. Um, Now, as far as I didn't. You kind of before we started talking, you talked about how the charging international visitors, and I
Right.
think that's an answer. In some parks, you get a lot of foreign. We get a lot of foreign uh, tourists. Just doing all the tours over the years, we'd always have quite a few of them.
Right.
So that may be if they're if they can afford to come here on a vacation, maybe that ain't going to break the bank. They're still coming. They still want to go. So that may be an answer. But um, yeah, the fees, and that's always, luckily I was a interpretive ranger. So I did the tours, I did the historical walks, I did the nature walks. So
Right.
I was doing the fun stuff.
Right.
When the people come in the gate, the poor fee collectors got to deal with that. Why are you
Oh, I
charging
know.
me? I'm an American citizen. They're supposed to be. So they got to deal with all that stuff.
I
And
know.
so they get a lot. By the time they get to us in the park, they want to have a good time. They're tired.
There you
They've already
go.
complained. So we didn't get a lot of that stuff.
There
But
you go. Well, you know what I would like to see again. I couldn't really help you because you were at the federal level, uh, but when I was a state representative, I put different bills into drafting all the time. I never really filed a bill because I couldn't get the verbiage right. I couldn't get the language right, but I was always looking for solutions to make our state parks more accessible. I crafted language where if the state park was in a county that allowed dogs on the beach, well, that state park should follow the county ordinance again, because I didn't want that to be a barrier. I filed all kinds of drafting language. I never actually filed the bill, but I drafted all kinds of language to say, can we make parks be free for Floridians? What do you think about that? I mean, just like how the federal government is shifting more of the burden to our foreign tourists, would you like to see maybe a similar program for Floridians at state parks where it's free to Floridians, but if you're here on vacation, it's $5?
I think that would be great because we do get so much tourism, and that's how Florida already part of our state budget is taxes on tourists and visitors, and so they have, and that basically funds our state budget for a lot of the things that we have in our budget. So
Yeah.
I think that would be a great, especially for state parks. I think that would be fantastic.
Well, and while we're talking about, because obviously these things cost money, while we're talking about finances, you know, I hate to say it, there are solutions out there. I don't know how Um, I don't know how palatable these solutions would be. I don't know if I would like to see any of these, but I wrote down a list of possible answers for our parks, both at the federal and the state level. Um, I talked to you before about how, they have soft drink machines at all the parks. They have, at Great Beach State Park, they have kayak rentals. Uh, I'm wondering if we could maybe get sponsorships and sell those sponsorships out, like to the Coca-Cola distribution folks. Hey, if you want to be the official soft drink of Gulf Islands National Seashore, that's going to cost you a licensing fee, and that licensing fee is going to pay for interns. It's going to pay for programs. Or in the case of Great Beach State Park, you want to rent kayaks. All right, well, hey, you can be the official kayak supplier for Florida state parks, but it's going to cost you, and you'll get to rent those kayaks to everybody who comes. So I would like to maybe see some sponsorships. Uh, there's always the thought. One thing that lets me sleep peacefully at night. When I think, Bob, about our country and the direction of our country and the fact that we have this massive debt. We have a 40 trillion national debt, and we're doing deficit spending. Then I stop and think of all the land that our country owns. I mean, just that stretch of beach right there between Pensacola Beach and Navarre Beach. Boy, if times ever really got tough, I mean, we could always even sell off unused land that we own, but we don't currently develop or we don't currently use it for anything. Again, extreme examples. I'm not saying I would want to sell any parkland, but those options are certainly there. Uh, you may have heard at the state level. Did you hear about a year ago? There were some rumblings about putting golf courses in the state parks, and boy, I got to tell you, I was against that. You know, if you've got a park that's protecting a natural spring, I don't really want a golf course next to it. Or if you've got Grayton Beach, like I keep referencing with these beautiful beaches, I don't really want to bulldoze the beaches and put golf cabins out there. Any thoughts on that?
Well, yeah, as you were saying earlier, you're talking about you're worried to protect the parks from developers, and that's exactly that's developers are coming in with those. They have their agenda to make money for golf courses. So yeah, you don't want that. That's part of the mission is to protect that land. So
Amen. Amen. Well, and so I have one final question for you, Bob, and then I think we've actually come up with some solutions here. I think it would be great at the state park level, at places like Grayton Beach State Park. It would be great if the fishermen, if the kayakers had a code, because to be honest with you, I kayak as soon as the sun's up, right? So I kayak at 6 in the morning. If the park doesn't open till 9 a.m., that's prime time that's being wasted. So perhaps our state parks could do the code system like you're describing at the federal level. I think we may have found an answer there. Uh, Also, if we can reduce the fees for locals, if we can say, hey, if you've got a Florida driver's license, welcome. This is your park. Now obviously charge for cabin rentals and kayak rentals,
right.
but for admission, I think we may have found a solution there. One final question, and then I'll let you go. In your experience working for the National Park Service, the Department of the Interior, was there anything you did that you thought could have been done better if we contracted it out to a private company? Like, for example, the TSA. I hate the TSA. I would much rather go back to private security firms like we used to have back in the old days. Because again, if you live in Fort Walton, you know who the colonel is, you know who the pharmacist is, you know they're not going to blow up a plane. I think private security would be better from a TSA point of view. Would private management be better, in your opinion, for state parks, for national parks? Should we contract those duties out, or do you think there's certain things you just simply cannot contract out?
Some of them you may not be able to, but we do. We had that was part of the directive. He would interview for contract. We had a lot of contractors doing. We had them working the snack bar for Pickens right by the campground. The campground
Yeah,
store. So they for years they would get uh, contracted people to work there and work those the campground store, which is been closed for a long time. Um, and I don't know how they picked them because they had one campground store guy working there for 3 years making money. You cannot that you can't lose money. He'd be the worst businessman in the world. Apparently, this guy was, and he just packed up overnight and left.
wow.
And so, they didn't have a contract for the whole rest of the time I was there. The camp store wasn't open. They hired contractors from the boat, the ferry boat from Pensacola Beach, and Fort Pickens. They hired a contractor to work the tickets and the sales and the gift shop there and food and the sodas. They're still there, so they're in one of the historic buildings that they renovated and fixed up for them. So they're actually contracting that section out. So that can be done. And
Yeah.
there's and I don't know this one. I don't know enough about it, but I always thought law enforcement in the park. We have our own National Park Service law enforcement. So
Right.
they're usually guys who've been trained as deputies, have been to certain academies. They have to go. There's a dozen or so academies that they have to go to. But they're right along with the director. They have a director of security. Yeah, they have their own national park police cars and all that kind of stuff, and they do all the security. They're always shorthanded, always. So they hire a lot of those seasonal rangers, law enforcement rangers. There are literally times when we would have incidents. I didn't have to deal with it as much, but I did a few times. So we had to call law enforcement to take care of something unruly that was going on, usually in the campgrounds. And they go, "Hey, we're we're at Johnson Beach. We only got one ranger on, and he ain't going to be there for an hour at the
Wow.
pass." So we had that problem. And so sometimes, we just had to go 911 and try to get the sheriff's Okaloosa or Scambia to come. So that's one area where always been shorthanded law enforcement. Private security may be the answer for that.
Well, it's great to have your point of view on these things, because I think most everybody who's watching this can agree with the points, Bob, that we've talked about, right? The mission. Uh, let's keep all of our parks, state and federal, let's keep them accessible to everybody, as open as we can get them. Let's not bring politics into the National Park Service. Let's certainly don't bring it into our state park programs. Let's have a better balance between preserving ecosystems and allowing human beings to interact with nature, because for some people, that's the only interaction they get with nature. And I think we're all in agreement that, part of preserving our national parks and our state parks means don't turn them into golf courses. Try not to sell our assets unless it gets to an untenable position. But, I really wanted to have you on before the 4th of July, Bob. I really appreciate you doing this because, with 4th of July coming up, I would encourage everybody out there, enjoy your state parks. Uh, Great Beach State Park right now is actually free. Again, this is something we maybe can talk about on another episode. Free for everybody. You don't have to be a Floridian. The Tourist Development Center is paying for your fee to go to Great Beach State Park. I don't know if that's true in a lot of state parks, but you can go to the beach at Grayton. Certainly, Bob, where you used to work, the Gulf Islands, you talk about a beautiful beach. And there's a chance that you could be out there and be, if you go at the right time of day, you could be all alone out there. It's
Yeah.
beautiful. And certainly the history at Fort Pickens. Any advice you want to give our viewers before we sign off, Bob, in terms of enjoying those national parks?
Well, I'm just saying, and you're talking about solutions, and there's one department in the U.S. government that almost everybody loves, and that's the National Park Service. I don't care
Amen.
whether you're a liberal or a conservative or a Democrat or Republican or an independent. Everybody loves it, and everybody is wants to make it work. So, and I think that's an area where we can come together with common sense and get some good ideas and talk to people on the ground and come up with good ideas. And I think um, hopefully we'll be able to keep our parks open and accessible to everyone. So that's my wish, and I think it's very achievable. I hats off to you, Dr. Rubman. You you know this, and you're trying to get an answer for our state parks, and you see, you know, it's that balance, and you got to be careful about um, going from one extreme to the other, and that's where you see problems. Almost you see,
And it is a balance as well. It's a balance between capitalism and collectivism, right?
Mhm.
Because just because the United States and Canada, just because for the most part, these countries charge admission. Bob, over in my wife's country in Great Britain, they have national parks. Snowdonia National Park in Wales, but it's more of an ownership thing. In other words, the government doesn't lord it over you there. They don't charge you admission to enter. It's just more of a, hey, you can't build a high rise here because we own it. This mountain is for everyone. So even if it means just backing off of some services and just having it where people can go to the beach. Even if it means having fee-free days, which they do actually
yeah,
at Fort Pickens.
they do, yeah.
President Trump has made about 6 or 7 days a year that are fee-free. I encourage everybody to go to the website and learn those free days because if nothing else, you need to enjoy your national parks on those days. Bob, thank you for joining the podcast. And thanks for those wonderful tips. You have a wonderful rest of the month. And I hope you enjoy your 4th of July coming up. It's the 250th.
Absolutely. God bless, Dr. Rubman. Thank you for
Thank you
having me
so
on.
much.